In any good seafaring tale, the teller embellishes and exaggerates to give you their point of view. And the story of Titanic needs no exaggeration. Even the official story is full of holes. The first tale of the sea we hear about Titanic is that she sank in one piece. Another tale was that her hull was weak and caused her to sink. Another tale was that there was a fire in a coal bunker. Another tale was that Titanic would race through an iceberg field to make record time. Why would Captain Smith risk racing through an ice field for record time? Time against what? Time against his own ships? Cunard was already known to be a faster line. The White Star Line was built as a luxury line. Why didn't Titanic go south, avoid the ice field? Why didn't Titanic break at the expansion joint? This would be the logical place for her to break in two. Here we see she broke farther down, closer to the stern. We see the expansion joint is in perfect condition. Lawrence Beasley, a science teacher and a credible witness and survivor of Titanic, said Titanic had a list to port exactly like that of Olympic. There was an Italian on deck, and he claims he saw another ship lurking in the vicinity, and he said he never saw an iceberg. Who gave orders to Carpathia to only pick up the survivors and then quickly rush off, leaving the bodies there? And when the Mackie Bennett came and picked up the bodies, it was noticeable that they were cut and bruised. Most passengers would have died from the freezing water. There is no reason for them to be cut and bruised. Did Ismay order Carpathia away so that they would not see the bruised and cut bodies? One sailor at the retrieval of the bodies found a piece of the grand staircase and jagged chunks, and he said, "This looks like it must have exploded." He hid it underneath his jacket and kept it for years. What could set off a big enough explosion to tear her from hull to hull, the entire width of the ship? Now that's huge. How could Titanic have sustained so much damage? Among the passenger list who did not survive was John Jacob Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss, the three richest men in the world. For these men to not be able to get in a lifeboat begs question. They would be first to be offered a seat, and there's no record that they gave their seat to women or to children. How come the other 58 first-class men didn't give up their seats, if that was the theory? The notorious banking titan, J.P. Morgan, was supposed to board Titanic. Morgan canceled at the last minute, claiming ill health. Yet, he was seen perfectly well with his mistress in France on the very day. Several other prominent figures, Morgan associates, canceled as well. Was Morgan involved in the sinking of Titanic? The truth depends on who's telling the story. If this is the only time we have together, then we shall not be able to hear the whole story of Titanic. As we look again with renewed curiosity, come to your own conclusions about what happened to Titanic, and I encourage you to do so. Her legend captivated our hearts and touched the soul. Shakespeare said, "All the world is a stage." So have we been led to believe what we see in the movies? That's the paradigm, the model we had. We have heard the his story theories that still leave us with unanswered questions. What really happened? Was a great crime afoot? Titanic has much to tell from her ominous grave beneath the sea. In the serenity of the telling is a story that unfolds of a perfect crime. One cold night, a shipman said something very eerie on his deathbed. Titanic did not sink. And then there were surviving passengers that support that Titanic did not sink. A few of the crew that jumped ship at Queenstown saw something in the hull. that made them abandon ship, even though it meant no work and not feeding their kids. Solomon said, "And with all thy getting, get understanding." Hiding information like this makes us want to know even more. Was it Smith's record of continual accidents that nearly bankrupted the White Star Line? His popularity and celebrity gave the impression of a trusted captain. Yet, Captain Smith himself had many plights, unknown to anyone who did not have access to British naval records. The expanded accounts on his numerous collisions, even before his string of wrecks with Titanic's twin sister Olympic, was quite telling. And Captain Smith had crashed the RMS Olympic severely, leaving Olympic to be declared a wreck. How could Smith be let anywhere near the twin sister Titanic? Why did Titanic have only a half-a-day sea trial in shallow water? Why did the official record read Titanic went down in one piece? Why were the women survivors who said they saw the ship break in two told they were in shock and that they must have been mistaken? Why was the surviving crew taken to an empty building and threatened with a 20-year prison sentence under the Official Secrets Act to never speak of the sinking? Why, if there was nothing to hide? When Titanic was built, she had evenly spaced portholes. When Olympic was built, she had unevenly spaced portholes. When Titanic left Southampton, she had unevenly spaced portholes. The wreck found 2 miles below sea has unevenly spaced portholes. And why did they carpet the exquisite tiled floors of the a la carte restaurant on Titanic if they were new? You would not go to the expense to lay intricate, expensive floors and then cover them with the carpet. Was the carpet to hide wear of a floor that would show scuffs and scratches? Was it to hide the fact that it was not a new ship? The last-minute expense to carpet floors and a few cosmetic changes up on the bridge when the White Star Line was facing potential bankruptcy. It all leaves a strange question in our minds. Was this a new ship? Einstein said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant." Our intuition asks us to question preconceived notions. Our intuition lets us know something's not right. And the faithful or rational mind says, "Don't ask questions and don't rock the boat." Today we are going to rock the entire fleet of the White Star Line. What I'm going to share with you took digging and thinking and researching. Some of the fascinating things that I've questioned about Titanic will connect the dots. There are many stories from the survivors that put together a different picture of what happened to this beautiful liner. But it is the man who owned the White Star Line that is of interest, because of the secrets he held close to his chest. Who was the man who owned the White Star Line? The story of Titanic is the story of a man, a mastermind, creating monopolies beyond the dreams of the common man. He was known for keeping competitors locked in his museum for days, or held captive on his estate on Jekyll Island until the deal he wanted was struck, or out at sea on his yacht, never anchoring till they agreed to his schemes. And one of his purchases was the White Star Line. Once upon a time, on an overcast morning in Belfast, Ireland, in 1907, a silver ghost Rolls-Royce pulled up to the offices of Harland and Wolff. Cigar smoke billowed out as the chauffeur opened the door, and the huge figure appeared in his top hat and overcoat. This was the famous J.P. Morgan. He was a bigger-than-life character. The handle of his crystal walking stick glistened even in the dull sky. He caught the eyes of the workers at Harlan and Wolff. His bulbous nose was ugly. He had a bad case of rosacea, which made it look huge and bumpy. He was known to intimidate people with it because they could not bear to look at him. But most of the time, inwardly, he was devastated with the grotesque appearance. He would never let any photographers get shots of him. Any photo he had control of, he had retouched. On some photos and paintings, he even had hair painted in. His son Jack, a younger version of himself, followed, and they headed into the offices of Harlan and Wolff. Bruce Ismay and Lord Perry received them. Morgan proceeded to puff his cigar. He seemed always encircled in a cloud of smoke. He was there to buy the White Star Line. Yet Ismay wasn't on par with the likes of Morgan. Ismay stood firm that the White Star Line was not for sale. Morgan had inside information that the White Star Line was on the brink of bankruptcy, and he knew there were many out of work. Ismay was pushing his best pompous attitude, and he replied that an American was not even allowed to own a British line. Morgan, however, did not want it known that he owned it. He knew his merchant marine company would purchase the White Star Line, and no one would be the wiser. In fact, Morgan was looking at buying up the Italian shipping lines next to gain the monopoly on the European shipping lines. Neither Ismay nor Lord Perry wanted to sell to the likes of this monopolist. But Morgan boasted that he could save it, and it would put the city back to work. Big money in their pockets. So Morgan became the owner of the White Star Line. It was Morgan's dream to build luxurious floating hotels, the largest ever to be built. Olympic, Britannic, and Titanic. He wasn't going for speed, but for elegance and opulence. Let the Cunard Line go for speed, Morgan thought. We shall gain the vacationing crowd with money, and make plenty on the bar and steerage. Morgan wanted Ismay to stay and run the White Star Line. And so the largest dock ever was commissioned to house the bulk of these huge ships. Olympic's keel was laid. Morgan brought new energy. The shipmen cherished the work. They had been through tough times with the stifled White Star. They were glad for the wages and proud to be working on the greatest ship in the world. And so Olympic was the first off the line. Captain Smith was to take the helm. He was known as the Millionaire's Captain. Olympic was launched on October 20, 1910, without having been christened beforehand. Now Morgan loved ships. He had the largest collection of luxurious yachts, each one built just for him, each one larger and more pretentious than the others. He would do much of his business on the yacht. And the yachts were also a private place where he took his mistresses, and although he kept the affairs somewhat discreet from his home life, New York society was littered with ex-Morgan mistresses. They forgot the grotesque nose and focused on twinkling diamonds and the beautiful estates he lavished them with, and he made sure his endless string of women were set for life when he was done with them. The decks of his yacht, his floating world, was where he lived, and in his mind there were no laws at sea, so he did whatever he wanted, whatever furthered his empire. And Morgan had just finished his huge breakfast out on the exterior deck salon, and he lit a cigar. And Jack came in with a telegram stating that Olympic had been in an accident. Morgan couldn't believe it. This was Olympic's maiden voyage. What was he hearing? But arriving on the docks in the New York harbor, Olympic's propeller drew a tugboat into her, and the tugboat was destroyed. Morgan cursed as he pulled the cigar from his lips. These huge propellers on Olympic were a new triple blade design, and they would suck smaller boats into them. So we see Captain Smith's first accident with Olympic. Now Morgan did not want to soil the reputation of his new ships, so he quickly paid a huge sum to keep the matter quiet. But it was the next news that Morgan received that took the wind out of his sails. Morgan watched as Jack ran a newsreel on his projector. This time, Olympic's plight couldn't be hidden. Film showed Olympic with a giant gash. The HMS Hawk and Olympic had collided, and the Hawk was a warship with an underwater ram designed to sink other ships, and had opened the starboard stern side of Olympic's hull. It did some underwater damage as well, the extent of which had not yet been examined. The film ran out of the projector, and Morgan sat there, a silhouette in the projector light, his bulbous nose in a foreboding shadow. Even Jack had to cringe. With all Morgan's power, there was no way he could keep this from the press. It was already in a newsreel. So now, a second accident for Captain Smith. You would have thought that Morgan would have fired him after the maiden voyage accident. And then Jack gave Morgan the bad news. British naval inquiry charged that Olympic was at fault, and Morgan would have to pay all the damages to the British Navy. And on top of that, he had to put up all his Olympic passengers in hotels and pay their fare on other ships to their destination. Morgan fumed as his thick brows crunched over his black eyes. He poured himself an 80-year-old scotch. And now Morgan was angry. Revenge filled his thoughts and his veins where blood should have run. Ideas formed in his head. These men were not going to get one over on him. He'd get them one way or another. Smoke billowed out from his lips until he was surrounded in a huge cloud. The ash on his cigar grew long. Without Olympic running and Titanic unfinished in the docks, Morgan's grand plan to build these 3 floating hotels was crumbling, and he moved closer to bankruptcy. And more bad news came. Andrews, the White Star Line designer, announced that she was hit to the keel and that she had a list to port, and that the Hawk's ram had reeled the death blow. Her damage under the waterline penetrated to the keel, and any shipman knows if the keel is destroyed, the ship is destroyed. This was a huge sum of money that Morgan faced losing. He insisted she be fixed. But how could Andrews get across to Morgan that she was not seaworthy, she was done for, that it would cost more to repair Olympic than to build a new one? Pulling a ship down to its keel to make repairs was just not affordable. He pled with Morgan, as much as any man could. He explained he'd have to tear her in half and take the engines and the boilers and the turbines out just to get to the keel. And he'd have to build a new keel and then a new hull. It just wasn't worth it. But Morgan couldn't think of anything to do. For days he drank and he smoked, and then slowly an idea came. Morgan's plan was to patch up Olympic. The hull was an easy fix, only rivets and paint. She looked great above the waterline. Then Captain Smith took her out to Sandy Hook off the coast of New York and ran over a sunken wreck. The accident had caught Olympic's propeller in the sunken ship, and Olympic's propeller dragged along the wreck, causing extensive damage. Another accident. This is the 3rd wreck that Olympic is in, with Captain Smith at the helm. Olympic had to be towed all the way back across the sea to the docks. So does Morgan fire Smith? No. So what was going on? What was afoot? Was Smith trying to get the insurance for Morgan? Or is Smith just that daft? Now Olympic's propeller is destroyed and left for scrap metal. Claiming the insurance on Olympic was the only thing that would put him back into the green. Morgan filed the insurance claim, hoping they wouldn't notice that the keel damage was really from the Hawk accident. But to Morgan's surprise, it really didn't matter, because they turned his claim down, saying that the sunken wreck was charted on the maps. Now Morgan was in a huge financial bind. Titanic was not yet off the dock, and Olympic was not bringing in passengers, not even seaworthy. And Morgan was overextended. He had not yet pulled off his cartel, the Federal Reserve System, so money was not flowing in from there. And he had to pay off his numerous yachts, and those were the largest and most expensive ever built at the time. And Morgan had his string of mistresses, which was an endless drain on his money supply. Then there was the Morgan Museum. He filled it with the collections that would not fit in his house, all his rare jewels and statues and his priceless books and priceless historic letters that he continually collected. And he had a huge estate by the coast, and his Madison Avenue mansion, and his estate on Jekyll Island, and he bought the steel company, and it all cost. So if Olympic did not make good, the White Star Line was facing bankruptcy. Jack had warned him not to buy a staggering line. Morgan must have had another plan for this ship that was declared a wreck. We know Morgan's plan did not involve tearing Olympic in two and rehauling her from the keel up, for there are no records of this occurring. Titanic was still months away from being ready. As the twin ships were docked side by side, Morgan ordered the propeller number 401 from Titanic to be put on Olympic and replace the destroyed build number 400 that was Olympic's number. The order to switch Titanic's propellers to Olympic is logged in Harlan and Wolff's records. The build number is key so they know what ship it goes on. So now Titanic's propeller build number 401 is on Olympic. And as well, orders were given to put bracing struts on Olympic's keel. Now why put a new costly propeller and costly bracing struts on a ship that is declared a wreck? So what was going on? It seemed sketchy sending out a ship that had been declared a wreck. Harlan and Wolff has accurate logging of the hole in Olympic's hull on the starboard side stern being fixed. They also have accurate records of the bracing struts added on Olympic's keel. There is also an accurate accounting of Titanic's propellers being switched to Olympic. Yet, all of a sudden after that, Olympic's records are missing for quite a long period. This is suspicious. You would never lose records on a ship that has been declared a wreck, especially if she is known to be on the high seas with bracing struts on a list to port. This is unheard of. For Harlan and Wolff to have lost those records on Olympic at that time leads one to believe dastardly deeds were afoot. Captain Lord was called to Morgan's yacht for a meeting. Lord was captain of the Californian through another shipping line that Morgan owned. He stood tall and proud, as he was sure after Captain Smith's despicable accidents that Smith would be dismissed and he, Lord, would be asked to captain Titanic, which was now advertised for its April voyage. Lord could hear Morgan's words in his head. "Smith is finished. You shall captain Titanic. I wouldn't let that fool near my ships after what he's done to Olympic." Captain Lord stood there, his lips pursed to say yes, but Morgan only toyed with his cigar with a strange look in his eye. and he commenced. "Captain Lord, I hear you saved thousands of passengers from a sinking ship and transferred them all over to your ship in an hour's time without losing a soul." Lord's shoulders broadened and, "Yes," he said. You could just hear Captain Lord's thoughts. "This is fantastic," he's thinking. "The commission of a lifetime." But Morgan was in his own thoughts as he sucked on his cigar. Morgan gestured toward the scotch to offer Lord one. As Lord poured, Morgan's words came in an exhale of smoke. He wanted Captain Lord to take the Californian out to sea. Can you imagine? Lord must have been shaken, thinking, "What in the heck? Captain Smith just wrecked your prize ship, and now you're going to let him captain the Twin? You're mad!" Yet, as he held silent, his disdain creased in his forehead. Why would Morgan be talking to a captain experienced in saving thousands of lives from a sinking ship? That alone begs question. Morgan must have discussed some other secret information and then dismissed Lord. Now Olympic and Titanic are side by side on the dock. People always got the twins mixed up. It would have been all too tempting for Morgan to switch the ships at this point. All that would be needed would be to switch the nameplates, lifeboat nameplates, the menus, cover the wear on the floors with a carpet, change out the used furniture. It would only take a small crew. And we do know this was all taking place during the coal strike, so the docks would have been empty. It was apparent that Morgan had to figure out how to get enough coal for Titanic's run, Californian, and Olympic. Because of the coal strike, there was no coal to buy. Morgan realized the dilemma, and he had to come up with an idea. His brilliant mind charged in thought. He had his men go around to the stranded dock ships and buy up every bit of coal in their boiler rooms. Salvaging all of it, there was enough coal to get Titanic, the Californian, and Olympic to sea. This is said to be footage of Titanic. Look at the film closely. You'll see that the identification on the tugboats is scratched out. The obvious reason is because Titanic never made it to New York. Clearly, this is Olympic, and the tugboats were in New York. Therefore, they scratched the names out. Since the ships were twins, pictures of Olympic were often used for Titanic. And there weren't many pictures of Titanic since she had met with her demise early on. Now as Olympic and Titanic sat side by side on the dock, Morgan executes new orders. Now remember, Morgan is furious that the British Navy got one over on him, and he wasn't about to lose his investment. Bankruptcy was not an option. This became personal. It's easier to fool people than to have them believe that they have been fooled. Morgan brilliantly laid all the focus on Titanic's maiden voyage as he drew attention away from the trying, disheartening collisions of Olympic's plights. Quietly, Olympic, or the ship now called Olympic, set out to New York on March 7th, far enough away so no one could compare the twins. And meanwhile, Titanic did her sea trials. Maritime law requires sea trials for new ships. And for a ship this size, it would be a 3-day run, seeing it handle in deep water, seeing it handle in the docks. But Titanic only had a half-day trial in shallow water. Why? How could they even get away with that? The usual requirement was 3 days in deep waters. That did not give the inspector enough time to go down and check the boilers and the engines or the turbines. Titanic spent a month building her excitement for her maiden voyage. 2-page advertisements in newspapers touted the stage and other eminent personalities were to grace their presence on Titanic. And then the Californian left with no passengers, a few doctors, sweaters and blankets, and oddly no cargo. Which is strange because it would have been quite easy to acquire passengers. In a coal strike, only 2 ships were leaving, Titanic and Californian. Who could even afford to send a ship off with no cargo? The Californian left a fortune on the docks by not taking cargo, and Morgan was complaining of not wanting to lose money, yet sends his own ship out empty? It's very suspicious. And again, how in the world could Morgan let Captain Smith take Titanic on a maiden voyage after what he'd done with Olympic? Remember, Smith had an accident with Olympic on her maiden voyage, and then crashed the Hawk, and then ran over the sunken wreck, destroying the propeller. If this was really Titanic, Smith would have been the last person Morgan would have asked to take his new liner on her maiden voyage. He would not have let Smith anywhere near his new ship. Now all the gazing crowd that came to see Titanic off were surely given entertainment. As Smith takes her out of the docks on her maiden voyage, he had run too close and sucked the SS New York off her tether. Smith must have been a nervous wreck. One of the tugboat captains saw the unmanned New York aiming for Titanic. Because of the coal strike, the SS New York had virtually no crew and was not running its engines. And now it was just being sucked into Titanic. Smith could see his career ending in this moment. The tugboat captain yelled an order to lash the SS New York and pull her away. But his tosser's first few throws missed. The New York drew within inches of Titanic. Captain Smith stood frozen, watching it all before his eyes. Can you imagine? People on the docks were gasping. Smith must have been sweating bricks. And the heroic captain, his ship dangerously close, had the tosser throw the line out again. And this time it held, and he yelled, "All full on the engine!" This was an incredible feat, and he saved the SS New York from crashing into Titanic's hull with inches to spare, and saving Captain Smith yet another slash on his record. So Smith is in another near miss on Titanic's maiden voyage. We just witnessed Smith in 2 incidences on maiden voyages for the White Star Line before he's even to sea. If he's not able to make it out of the harbor, how could you trust him on the high seas? His popularity and celebrity gave the impression of a trusted captain. Yet Smith almost single-handedly was the cause of putting the White Star Line on the edge of bankruptcy. Yet he was asked to take the helm of Titanic, a brand new multi-million-dollar liner. He was known as the millionaire's captain. How did he gain that reputation? He saw how other captains waited for commissions for years on the White Star Line, and now he knew he wasn't a great navigator. In fact, Smith did not pass his navigation test the first time, but Smith did have wit. Using New York, where his flights would be little known, he would use his charm and his connections and a social life to move up the ranks for the bigger commissions. His plan was to hobnob at social affairs and get invited to high society events and mingle with the elite to gain his celebrity to advance his position. If his record had been known to the New York crowd, they certainly would have shunned him. Captain Smith's naval record shows as captain he was involved in running the Republic aground, plus killing 3 crew members in a boiler accident on the same day. And in 1890, he ran a ship aground off Rio de Janeiro, and in 1901, aboard the Majestic, and in 1906, aboard the Baltic, Smith was responsible for huge fires on board. And then Smith ran the Adriatic aground. Why would Smith be let anywhere near the twin sister Titanic? So here on Titanic, if there was to be another accident now on the maiden voyage, would the investigations have exposed this would have been Olympic? And why was Captain Smith not able to concentrate and maneuver his ship? Why was he such a nervous wreck? And why would all this not be looked into further? Well, of course, the White Star Line had put everybody under the Secrecy Act not to speak of the sinking. And certainly, the White Star Line had lost any hopes of being a credible line. The British by now knew they were going to war in the near future, and Morgan knew it too. So he offered to take their gold and shipments to America for safekeeping, away from the possibility of getting into German hands. And there were also rumors of a British military van that arrived with crates marked museum statues and secretly loaded in the early hours of the morning into Titanic's cargo hold in Southampton on April 10th. Morgan was supposed to board in Cherbourg, but at the last minute, he canceled his reservations and had the crates marked museum statues removed. Did he remove these crates because he knew the ship was going down? So Morgan had good reason to sink the ship. For that fortune alone, millions in bullion. And Morgan had an earlier example of how to pull off this crime. Surely he had read about the SS Islander. It was said to have struck an iceberg, sinking with the gold cargo she carried. Did this entice Morgan? Did it give him ideas? And Morgan wasn't the only one to cancel his reservations on Titanic. A few of the crew jumped ship at Queenstown, even though it meant going back to where there was no work. And the White Star Line had enforced the Secrecy Act. It was frightening to be threatened. The White Star Line had even hired bulls who watched for loose lips, even in the pubs. Something that is overlooked is that some of the survivors said Titanic exploded and then broke in a V shape, not that she broke from the weight of the stern. One of the surviving crew drew this picture in his logbook, and the way she was shredded in a V shape leads to evidence of an explosion below in the hull. He hid the drawing and never spoke of it, and years later it surfaced through his family. Now, the Irish were shipbuilders, and there are theories that their riveting of the hull was not a quality job, and somehow that caused Titanic to sink. Somehow that doesn't hold water, since the rivets in Titanic's hull are still holding to this day. And the Irish were fantastic shipbuilders. The idea that a coal fire sank Titanic, well, that's not viable. Titanic exploded in the stern, not the bow area, not where this alleged coal fire would have been. And the stern is where you see evidence of a huge explosion, the hull protruding outward. What could set off a big enough explosion to tear her from hull to hull, the entire width of the ship? Now that's huge. That leads to explosives being set. Both port and starboard have the hull protruding outwards in massive sheets of steel. Notice that the Hawk accident, the steel is protruding inwards into her hull, whereas Titanic's hull is shredding outwards. Compare Titanic's sister ship, Britannic. She served in World War I and was sunk when she hit a floating German mine. If a German floating mine meant to take down a ship, could take Britannic down, and basically we see no damage from port hull to starboard hull, how could Titanic possibly have damage from port hull to starboard hull? And Britannic's was from a mine intended to sink a ship. How could Titanic have sustained so much damage? Now, some say an explosion from the boilers caused this massive damage. But if Titanic's boilers could explode Titanic from hull to hull and shred her in two pieces, why didn't Britannic explode when her boilers hit the water? And Britannic is still in one piece from a mine meant to sink a ship. Here are Titanic's boilers on the sea floor. They do not look like they have exploded, nor do her engines. One more of the many things that, when scrutinized, lead to that a switch was on. The way Titanic landed, there is no way to see this supposed 300-foot gash from an iceberg. When Titanic and Olympic were side by side, and the window changes were made and the propeller switched, Morgan could make the choice to pull a switch. Was a switch on? Was Olympic now Titanic? Was an insurance scam in place? These are the portholes of the wreck that was found 2 miles below the sea. They certainly suggest that dastardly deeds were afoot. And how could Morgan know that Smith would go along with this? Well, one reason might be that Morgan knew the Californian was coming and assured Smith no souls would be lost because Lord would save them all. Now another thing that begs question. Captain Lord was quoted as sleeping in his uniform that night in the chart room. What was he waiting for? And then when Californians saw the white rockets, Captain Lord dismissed them. A box of colored rockets was found near the wreckage of Titanic. Unfired colored rockets. Was Smith asked to fire only white rockets? And was Captain Lord asked to only look for colored rockets? Is that why the colored rockets are on the seafloor? Why did Smith not fire every rocket he had at his disposal? He had time to shoot them all. He had 2 hours and 40 minutes. Why didn't he fire all the rockets? Was his last thought that Morgan had double-crossed him? Morgan did get the insurance, and she did sink in 2 pieces, even though the official record said 1. And many of the first-class women saw the ship break in 2. Many of the women complained to Captain Smith that they felt vibrating during the voyage. They had made this trip many times. These were wealthy women who every year vacationed by ship to France, and they knew how a ship should feel. These women were told they must have been in shock and couldn't possibly have seen the ship break in 2. They also said they heard explosions. These women were ignored for years. Eva Hart stood by her story that she saw the ship sink in 2. Eva was adamant about what she saw, enough so to stand up to the heavy opposition she faced. And when Titanic was found by Ballard in 1985 in 2 pieces, proving the women were correct, Eva was still alive to relish in her claim that she had the truth. The historic accounts were falsified. Sadly, there were no official apologies, no decency of act attempted to give the women the merit in that what they saw was the official telling. So to pull off this scam, the ship would have to sink. There would have to be no chance that she could limp home like she had done before. So Morgan easily could have had explosives set. Morgan's conscience would be clear because he had the Californians standing by to save the passengers. They would all be transferred to an empty ship with 3,000 sweaters and blankets and brandy. No other cargo, no other passengers. Why would the Californian rush out and just sit there with a captain experienced in saving thousands of lives at sea from a sinking ship? Why didn't the Californian respond? It just does not add up. Was there a change in plan? Did the old adage, loose lips sink ships, come into play? Was it a coincidence the three richest men in the world coming back to vote against the Federal Reserve Money Trust Act all went down with Titanic? What's the connection there with the money trust bill that was formed on Jekyll Island by J.P. Morgan? Since 1985, several different submersible teams found number 401 build number on the propeller. But remember, Titanic's propeller was on Olympic. Now, what do you think? Other submersibles who assessed the hull report that the hull damage is protruding outward as if an explosion from her inside tore the hull outwards. Despite the immense fanfare and hype that surrounded Titanic's launch, it was roughly half full when it left Southampton. Did the White Star Line want to minimize the number of passengers because it intended to scuttle the ship? Or had rumors of the insurance scam spread outside the shipyard? Several last-minute cancellations from those notable passengers certainly suggest some kind of foreknowledge. And years later, there was a man who told his wife on his deathbed that he had changed the nameplates on the twins. For J.P. Morgan, he died very shortly after Titanic's demise. Olympic, meanwhile, went on to serve for another 25 years. The question that lingers in our minds is, how could a ship that's been declared a wreck possibly serve on the high seas, on the transatlantic crossing, being held together with bracing struts that had a list to port and was vibrating and had to travel so slowly not to seize up the engines? This is another point that does not add up. So was it just magical that her list to port all of a sudden disappeared, that her vibration disappeared, and that she was able to travel at her full speed capacity without the engine seizing up? Given the structural damage on Olympic and the fact that there are no records to show millions of dollars put into her for upkeep and these types of major repairs on a ship that had been declared a wreck, it's impossible to believe that she would be seaworthy for that many years. No one would have boarded for a transatlantic voyage on a ship that had lost its integrity. Certainly, word would have gotten out not to ever get on that ship. So to think that Olympic served 25 more years is really stretching our imaginations. Why didn't they save Olympic and turn her into a tourist attraction like they did with the Queen Mary? This was the sister of the most famous ship ever. It would have been a moneymaker. Hearing the story of Titanic leads us to ask, what other events in history have false narratives? And many more details and much more of the story awaits you in the pages of Titanic, A Perfect Crime.